Hi, everyone. Welcome to the That's Allowed podcast. I'm your hostess, Audrienne McKeon. And today, we're talking to Punam. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Adrienne. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Punam Saxena. I am a child of immigrant parents from India who immigrated here in the 60s. I've lived in the South, in Georgia and Florida and Alabama my entire life. I know I have that country drawl, right?
You do.
Um, I've raised four children. They are all in college now. They're 4.5 years apart, two girls, two boys. And our last two were twins, and they are girl boy twins. So my husband and I are empty nesters. But during this season in our lives, we have them home, and we're so happy to have them home. I have
Yeah.
an education degree in special education, and when the kids were born, I stayed home and I was a volunteer in their schools to try and be a change agent from the outside of being a parent and not a teacher. So that was my thought was I could be helpful being a volunteer. So I spent all my time, most of my time doing that. And I have my own podcast now. And it looks like you and I launched about the same time. And edu-me focuses really on bridging the gap between parents and schools because my parents both needed to work when we were growing up. And I had the good fortune to stay home with my kids, and I learned a lot. But there are things that we parents can be doing to be partners within the schools. And because I was an immigrant, there's so many nuances of a large section of our population that we are aware of, but we really don't focus on,
Yeah.
want to bring attention to. So I believe that's why we're here today.
Absolutely. So, a couple of things I wanted to talk about in there. So, twins, my goodness. I know some people who have twins who have told me that the first 2 years of their lives were just the hardest of their lives. But then after that, that it gets easier because they kind of entertain each other. Would you say that's true?
It is true. My oldest is 4.5 years older than the twins. So when the twins were born, I had a 4.5, a 2.5, and newborns.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say the first 2 years were a complete blur. I'm certain that I hugged and loved and rocked them, but I have no recollection because it's a matter of crisis management. And crisis management was if you were not in a crisis, I didn't, you didn't get full on attention. And that sounds terrible as an educator, but it was really survival. And now that they're older, it's just so wonderful to see how they help each other. It's really amazing.
Yeah.
I can't honestly tell you how I did it those first years. It was tough.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, I think a lot of the time we really have no idea how we survived something. We just took it by day, right? You just do what's
Yes.
in front of you
Yeah.
every day until it's done.
And and do the best you can.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no real trick to it. It's just do it.
No, there's no trick at all. Sometimes you just have to laugh.
I remember somebody once, total stranger on the street, walked up to me and said, "What's your secret?" And it was such a weird random question that I gave
Hmm.
them a weird random answer. And I said, there is no secret. The secret is that it's just hard work. And he just laughed and laughed.
That's a great question, though.
Yeah. Yeah. What's your secret? There is no secret. The secret is hard work.
Or denial, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or just pure dumb luck.
Exactly, exactly. We always say the hard work is a huge part of it, of being successful, but then part of it is what you take from those moments that aren't successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So the
Yeah.
first question I always ask is, what story are you not telling?
So the story that I rarely share, and I've only been able to share it in the last 3 to 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Trust me, I'm old. So for me, this is huge to be able to share this. But I grew up in a very rural city in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And when we came to this city in 1970, which tells you how old I am,
Mm-hmm.
um, we were the only Indians that were in the city for the first 12 years.
Wow.
Now you think about it, 1970, 1964 was the civil rights movement, right? And when the laws were passed. So we're only talking 6 years after that. And we move into a city in rural Georgia, and they're all looking at us going, are they white? Are they black? Why does she have the dot on the center of her forehead? Why are her
Mm-hmm.
clothes different? Why are we speaking with a different accent? So it was a huge adjustment because our first language, my brother's and mine, is Hindi.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm totally fluent. He is also in Hindi. But when you don't want to stand apart, you immediately start changing who you are because
Yeah.
you fit in and not draw attention to yourself. And there were many things that happened during that period of my life that I try and look at from a positive lens now that I'm older,
Mm-hmm.
but they're deeply affecting, they have they had deeply affected my life and my trajectory in life. So would you like for me to talk about some of them or?
Absolutely. I just want to
Okay.
say first that it is a really important human need to feel like you belong. And so that experience of feeling like you didn't belong and wanting to belong, I just want to say that's 100% normal and human and nothing to feel ashamed about. I think a lot of us spend a lot of time sort of trying to fit in and then feeling badly or looking back on that and going, oh, I should have just been myself. Well, it's really, really difficult to do that because we
Yeah,
we just want to belong. We want a sense of family and belonging.
absolutely. And because my parents were very much a believer in keeping our culture, it was a difficult tightrope to walk at times.
Yeah.
So one of the short stories I'll share is that we went to India almost every other summer. We didn't have a lot of means, but whatever extra we had went to our tickets to India, and we spent 3 months in India. So when my dad left to come to this country in 1961, he was the first one to come to the States. And his plan was to come back or go back to India. But when he left, his mother told him that whatever he did in life, that he should never lose his relationship with his family. And she passed away 6 years later on his very first trip back home, soon after his first trip back home. And he's been here 1961. We're going on almost, I can't do the math, 60 years now, almost 60 years.
Yeah.
He has never faltered on that promise. We would spend 3 months there, and it would take us time to adjust when we got there because we had our southern drawl and we were speaking Hindi in our southern drawl. And then when we would come back and we couldn't speak English because we had to keep hearing it over and over for it to seep back into our vernacular. And it would take us about 3 weeks on each side
Yeah.
to adjust. But it was something that really changed our lives because even today, my relationship with my cousins in India is a brotherly, sisterly love.
Mm-hmm.
We grew up together.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily have those memories of being here in the summertime. Because when you're here in the summertime, it's different because everyone goes into their own world for that period of time. And I don't think I'm unique in that experience. I think many people go through that.
Yeah. Code
So
switching is a tough thing, and especially when you don't feel like you wholly belong in either world.
there's a book in me that's coming, that's going to be penned at some point in my lifetime, that's called Life at 37,000 Feet.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's honestly how I feel. I feel like half of me is over here and half of me is over here, and I'm just flying.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
So tell
it's
me,
it's an interesting life to grow up in when you
yeah.
have different cultures that you're balancing.
So can you give me an example, like an anecdote of ways that you were shown that you don't belong or you don't fit?
So when I did not go to kindergarten. I went to first grade. I went straight to first grade, and I was a straight A student. And this is probably why I have this whole passion for education. But in second grade, they wanted to teach me for the gifted program because my reading comprehension, my math skills, they were strong. And you have to remember we're talking 1976. It
Mm-hmm.
was centennial, I remember it. And they gave me the test for the gifted program, and I did not meet their criteria. And looking back as an educator, I can say at those in those days we did not have cultural nuances that played into that came into play. You know, English as a second language did not come into play. All of those things I can look at now and say
Mm-hmm.
that's probably what happened. But in second grade, when you're 7 and 8 years old, I mean, it's devastating, right? And my
Right.
parents didn't know enough about the system in the US. So I never made it into the gifted program. And from that day, I can tell you the day, to when I started grad school, when I got married, I was a C minus student. One test affected my entire educational career. And it's one of those things that no one could have changed, but it dramatically changed who I became.
Well, they could have if they had taken cultural differences into account. But I hear what you're saying.
Well, in the 70s, you didn't do that, right? We didn't really start doing that until the 80s, I would say, late 70s, 80s. So, you know, poor Mrs. Smith was my teacher, and she was loving and kind and sweet, and she was trying to do everything she could. But at that point, I wasn't motivated.
Yeah. So if you, I won't go into the whole story here, but if you want to listen to episode, oh, I don't know what number it is, but it's called oh, now I'm going to get it wrong. Uh, ah, Man, I can't believe I don't remember the name of my own episode.
I'm right there with you. It's okay.
But anyway, there's an episode where I talk about, and it's Miss something, Misimpression.
Okay.
Misimpression is what the name of it. And it's about my first grade teacher who actually was very abusive. And it's a similar situation where I came in with really high, potential, and she didn't like me and labeled
Hmm.
me as, remedial. And so that's how I thought of myself for the rest of my schooling. And I eventually went on to get a PhD like you. I kind of overcame it and realized, but it was literally my senior year of high school before I realized that I had been labeled this way and had then just taken that on and believed it. And it's amazing how powerful that is. They did this experiment where they put different rats and they labeled some of the rats smart rats and some of the rats dumb rats. And so then the people who were doing experiments with the rats were just making observations about them, but noticed that, yes, in fact, the dumb rats were dumb and the smart rats were smart. They had this cognitive bias that then came true.
Right. Right. Well, and think about the fact that we are labeling kids that way.
Yeah.
And it changed your life, it changed my life. How many kids walk into classrooms with biases
Mm-hmm.
and we're not helping them by putting labels on them. And so I think once I got my master's degree and now that my kids are older, I can look back and say there was probably 100% likelihood that this was what I was supposed to do,
Yeah.
was to go into their schools and pat those kids on the back whose parents were never engaged, to say, you know what, you're having a good day. It's so good to see you. I'm happy to see you smile. Whatever it is, just to make them feel good. And
Absolutely.
it's funny, I have a rule that I will not befriend any of my kids' friends on social media,
Mm-hmm.
graduate from high school, because I just don't think that's appropriate.
Right.
Unless they friend me and then I'm okay, but I will not reach out.
Yeah.
And it's so sweet. My birthday was just a couple of days ago and I got so many messages from their friends.
Oh, that's so sweet.
And part of it is making that relationship, when that relationship is so needed by these kids. And you and I have faced that. How different could it have been for us if we had someone who had done that?
Absolutely. I will also say I know a lot of people because, I hang out with academics. I know a lot of people who were in those gifted programs who also were kind of messed up by being labeled on the other side, because they had this expectation of themselves then that I get everything right the first time. I am smart. I don't have to work at things. And so then they have this problem of not having a growth mindset and having this
Right,
fixed mindset of, I'm the smart kid, therefore whatever I do is smart. But
right,
then also having this pressure of, you have to keep that up. And every time you have to do it perfectly,
right.
which is also really messed up.
Yeah. There's a lot of pressure. There's
Yeah.
just a lot of pressure. And the one thing that I told my kids was, be who you are, but be the best person that you can be while you're being who you are. And
Yeah.
it was interesting because one of my kids ended up taking the gifted test and did not pass. And I'm like, oh no, we're not doing this again. 30 years later, no way. And so I went to the principal and I said, this will not work. And she said, well, it's district policy. We have to wait another calendar year. And I'm like, nope, you're not going to do it.
Yeah.
My husband and I had that child tested privately and said, here are the scores. Because at the end of the day, I didn't want him to feel less than.
Yeah.
And I was trying to keep that gender neutral, but that didn't work out so well.
That's all right.
But
Yeah.
working off of the experiences you and I had, you kind of go the other way,
Mm-hmm.
and you
Mm-hmm.
want to make sure that if it's not correct, that you've done everything you can to ensure that one way or the other.
Yeah. So, what has blocked you from telling this story up until recently?
It is the fact that I feel like time was wasted,
Mm.
that I was wronged, that I was not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I did not want people to look at me like a failure.
Yeah.
And that's my biggest fear in life. And it definitely comes from this experience is I will work 3 times as hard to make sure that it is as successful as I am capable of making it. And that still may be a failure, but I've definitely given everything I have to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's changed me from being um, I don't even want to say relaxed, a lackadaisical person to being a very driven person.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because that's the next question is how did it change you? Is
It,
there
it,
anything
it
else you want to say about how this experience of growing up in the South and being so different from everyone around you and going back and forth between the two worlds, all that code switching has changed you?
It really has changed me. So, when I got married at 23, and my husband, bless him, he is a very patient soul, and he has been a cheerleader of mine. We will be married 29 years this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And he just keeps saying, "You can do it. Keep going. You can do it." And slowly, my parents said that too, so I don't want to negate that. So let me get that out there. My parents said that too, but mom and dads are supposed to say that, right?
Right.
And her husband says it is just a little different, is coming from a little different context.
Yeah.
And he has worked incredibly hard to rebuild what was broken down. And my parents live close by, and we talk about it often, that shift in paradigm in my life has changed so many things. And you talk about living in two different cultures. So obviously I have an American accent.
Mm-hmm.
When I speak Hindi, I speak with an American accent.
Uh-huh.
I'm able to communicate. I can get in a taxi and go anywhere in Delhi by myself. Not that I would, but I can. Definitely wouldn't go by myself, but I'm able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, there are times in India when I am speaking, I know that I'm not speaking correctly because 99.9% of my day is in English. And the grammar has fallen by the wayside. So, but the words are still there. And when I speak grammatically and correctly, I can see the hairs on, whomever I'm talking to go, that was not correct.
Mm-hmm.
And yet when I tell my mom that, and I tell her, now I'm a little less, you know, open about being able to speak, she said, do you care? If you're able to communicate and you can say what you need to say, then don't worry about it. It doesn't matter if it's grammatically correct. So, there's a lot of different pieces that you're trying to put together,
Yeah. It's hard
and
to,
you're constantly in limbo.
yeah, and it's hard to
Thing.
navigate.
Really want to say it's a good thing.
Yeah. You want to say more about that?
Yeah, it's a good thing. I really am learning to embrace where I am because I've worked hard to get here.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in I'm in several WhatsApp groups with my family in India, and I can pick up the phone and FaceTime them, and we have a fabulous conversation. There are others that I know that have similar situations, and they can't do that because they have no connection. And my parents wanted us to have that connection, and they've worked hard at it. And I keep telling them how grateful I am. But it's interesting sometimes because Indian cooking is hard.
Yeah.
So we eat a lot of, you know, quick and easy Indian meals. But one of the things that I did, because my husband's also Indian, is that when we were raising our children, I purposefully did not teach them Hindi. And it wasn't because I did not want them to know how to speak, but I did not want them to face the same challenges that I faced while they're living in America,
Mm-hmm.
which is being ostracized for your accent. It takes me sometimes a moment to translate what I'm thinking from Hindi to English and vice versa. And that gives the perception that I don't know what I'm talking about. But it just takes me a moment, and I don't think people really understand that when you're bilingual or multilingual, that it takes a moment. And
Yeah.
in America, we don't really teach language until high school, which is the exact opposite of what every psychologist and educational specialist will tell you. We need to be teaching it early. And I learned it early, so it does take more effort. So for your audience members out there, I would say if you know someone who is bilingual or multilingual and they're maybe struggling with the right words to say to you, it's probably because they're translating it in their heads.
Right. I want to
It,
say, I've heard you say a lot of things today that make me think that you are working very hard to manage other people's expectations of you. And so I just want to take a moment and kind of give you permission, because this is called That's Allowed, to only live up to your own expectations. Because you can't really know what other people's expectations are going to be, let alone manage them.
that's so true. And I do. I am a people pleaser.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the second half of misimpression. It's misimpression, people appeaser.
Yes. And that happens, I assure you. And you're so right. And I've never given myself permission just to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this phase of life that I'm in, age-wise, chronologically,
Mm-hmm.
helping me understand that I can be who I am.
Yeah.
And it's getting to be liberating. But when you've
Yeah.
had behavior for so many years, it becomes part of your personality, like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. Well, not
I'm
only
definitely working on that.
not only is it okay to be who you are, you actually can't be anyone else.
Isn't that interesting?
Funny how that works. And the harder you try, the worse it gets.
Exactly. Because your truth comes out in some form.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
you're so right. I don't allow myself to be myself because I've spent my entire life worried about what other people see me as
Yeah.
and trying not to be who I should be because we all want to be accepted.
Yeah.
And you said
Yeah.
the very first thing. And it doesn't change for anyone. It's just how you navigate it, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the next question is, who needs to hear this story? And I think we're kind of getting right up to there. So this is a good segue.
You know, the people who need to hear it are not necessarily the people who are walking in my shoes.
Yeah.
It's the people who immediately make a judgment on someone's personality and character based on a physical attribute.
Mm-hmm.
And I have darker skin. I have black hair. Well, yeah, kind of black hair. And I look different, but it doesn't mean that I don't have the same emotions and the same goals and the same dreams that others may have. I just may approach them differently. And the people who need to hear that Adrian, and you probably will laugh at this, but it's the people who need to hear it are the ones who are not quite ready to hear it.
Isn't that always the way?
It is, and that's maybe why I work so hard to talk like an American and dress like an American, because I don't want any any other barrier to be there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll tell you another story, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So, I was born and raised here. My kids were born and raised here. And I always thought of myself as an American. I never really thought anything else. I mean, even though these things were coming in, some would stick into my head and they would become part of my behavior, and then others I was able to filter out. But after 9/11, our lives changed forever. I mean, and I'm not
Yeah.
talking just about the countries, I'm talking about individuals who have immigrated here or who were born and raised here of immigrant parents. And I remember my daughter was the only one in school at the time, I believe. I think she was. And I went into her school the next day. So September 12th, I went
Hmm.
to her school, and I remember every single office staff turning and looking at me. And all of a sudden, I realized that I was not part of them.
Yeah.
And that was heartbreaking.
Hmm.
And it was a school that I had been in for a couple of years and worked very hard to build relationships with. But all of a sudden, I realized I was different. And
And
I went,
let's be clear, it's not just immigrants. I mean, we're all, I think, on some level, the children of immigrants, unless we're Native Americans, right? It's brown people. It's
it's
brown
brown
people.
people. It's brown people. And I was working in the media center that day, and the media specialist came to me. Now, mind you, this is a media specialist,
Hmm.
right? The library with all these books. And the first question she asked me was, can you tell me the difference between being a Hindu and a Muslim? And I thought, now is not the time to learn that. That's my cynicism coming out, right? But it was a brutal reminder that we do not teach enough about cultural diversity.
Absolutely.
And my motto has always been, if we have to talk about diversity and try to figure out how to be diverse, then we are failing,
Yeah.
because we should not need to be talking about diversity. We should be talking about cultural differences.
Yeah.
Diversity does not mean color.
Yeah.
Again, it means bringing different ideas together.
Yeah, absolutely. There's neurodiversity. There's all kinds of different ways to think about diversity. And I agree. If you're just thinking about racial diversity, man, you're missing the boat big time.
Absolutely. And it's changed our lives to the point where my boys are not able to have long beards. I won't
Mm,
They
yeah.
have to keep their hair kept, because I don't want there to be any misjudging of who they are.
Yeah. That's so hard.
And it's a sad statement for the country that I grew up in and that I call.
Absolutely. Yeah. I hear that a lot from parents of, black boys specifically. Like, don't wear a hoodie, don't wear dreadlocks, don't, and that's such a tough thing to have to tell someone, change your appearance to fit in, but at the same time, it's it's physically dangerous to have a certain look, and that is so sad.
We are doing what we were told not to do in elementary school, which was not to judge a book by its cover.
That's exactly right.
And
Yeah.
so I don't know what the solution is, but those are some very simple experiences that we have had in our lives that is life altering.
Well,
It,
let's
it
talk about solutions. Let's talk about what we could do as individuals and as a group to make this better. I mean, you said one already, which is when you meet someone, don't jump to conclusions before you have a conversation with that person.
you would think it would be easy to know that, but it's not, right?
Yeah. To
And
have compassion, and to empathize that this is another human being and we're going to have things in common and we're going to think about things differently too. And like you said, it's really unfair to expect minorities to be our teachers, to come up and say, hey, explain to me the difference between this and this, or explain to me why I should be concerned about this. That's not their job. Their job is not
no.
to teach you how to be less racist. That's your job, is to go figure that out. Do some
You would think,
research.
you would think, I think the thing that I am learning, and, thinking back to my history classes when my son is taking a religions class in college. Now, mind you, he's a sophomore in college. He's taking
Mhm.
a religions class. And I said, so what religions are you learning about? And he goes, yeah, well, we talked about Hinduism and Buddhism for about 2.5 minutes. I'm like, oh, good. That's taking care of it all then. Right? I mean, who needs more than that?
Two of the most complicated religions in the world.
Well, exactly. And then one of their friends actually interviewed me because she had to write a paper on Hinduism.
Mm-hmm.
And she is a devout Christian and going to a very small college where there's not a lot of racial diversity.
Yeah.
And she said, so let's talk. And so I started to pull stories from the Bible. I told her stories from Hinduism, and then I pulled it from the Bible and told her how they connected, how they're
Yeah.
so similar,
They're so similar. There's so
so
much overlap.
similar.
Yeah.
And my first comment to her, and really anyone who asks, is there's no religion that tells you to hurt people, to be mean to people, to discriminate, to do any horrific thing that we think our
Is
religion
justified.
is to
Yeah.
do. You can't use religion as a justification for your hate.
Yeah. Never works.
And I believe that the more we go into our own corners of my religion is better than yours, we're always going to have this tug of war. And if you can pull out the similarities, it makes so much more sense.
Mm-hmm.
Been, that's a great sentence, start of a sentence. I've started to find the similarities because when I got to college, I actually took a class on Christianity and a class on Hinduism
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted to see what the similarities were.
Yeah. Well, I think if you boil down all of the world's religions to their, the teeny tiny little hardcore at the center, it's always the same, which is love one another and love God. The end.
The end.
Yeah.
2 sentences.
2 sentences, you're done. Love one another, love God. The end.
So here's something interesting. I'm going to take you back, way back to fourth grade, my fourth grade. In this rural city, volunteers from the church would come to our school and hand out pocket Bibles.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in the South in the 70s, and I had purged this from my memory until just a few years ago. And I chose not to take one because I said, I'm Hindu, I'm okay, thank you so much. I wasn't rude that I
Mm-hmm.
remember, but, I just politely declined. And the teacher called my dad that night and said, Punam chose not to take the Bible when they came to the classroom. And Now I think back and I'm like, what? And so my dad gets off the phone and we're sitting at dinner and he goes, so I understand you didn't take the Bible today. And I'm like, well, we're Hindus. So I just didn't think that it was appropriate for me to take it. I wasn't mean about it. I just politely said no. And he said something that I will never forget. He said, no religion is bad. Every religion is good. And it depends on how you want to live your life, whether you want to be open to all religions and take the good from all of them, or you want to close yourself off. And so the very next day, in front of my entire class, I got up and I walked to the front of the class and I took that Bible.
Hmm. I think that's great advice. That everything has tools for you. Everything has different metaphors that might work for you. Because like you said, at the base, it's all talking about the same thing. You're
Yeah,
all just looking at it from a different perspective.
right,
And the
right,
more perspectives you can get, the more of a, the bigger picture understanding you'll have of the nature of this.
right. Well, you're so right. And you were talking about a solution. The solution, I believe, is that we need to talk.
Yeah,
And we choose so many times not to have a conversation for our own selves because we're fearful of
right.
wanting to come out of that conversation versus what I can learn to make me a more whole person.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what we are lacking. And we're not teaching that early enough because when we get to middle and high school, it's too late. They've already made so many decisions about their paths. So having a 2.5 minute or 2 week conversation about different religions in your entire educational career is really not going to impact you.
How
And it's
about
not going, go ahead.
how about this? How about I'm going to lance a challenge to everyone who is listening.
Okay.
This week, have a conversation that scares you a little bit.
Hmm.
Think about what do I like, who scares me? You know? A group or a person or something just makes me a little bit nervous. Go have that conversation. Just ask some questions, get curious. Again, don't expect them to explain everything to you about themselves or their religion or whatever it is. But at the same time, come with your open mind and your curiosity and just try to get to know that person as a person and discover that, maybe not so scary after all.
I love that. I
Yeah.
really do. And I would, if I could interject, I would also say do your research.
Yes. Come into that conversation
Yeah.
with a little bit of research done so that they're not carrying the burden of it. Absolutely.
And come with a couple of questions that are inquisitive so you can have a dialogue.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Questions,
love that.
open-ended questions, not questions like, is it this or is it that? Questions like, tell me about this. I'm curious about this. I want to know
One of
more.
the most often asked questions is, how do you get that gem in your forehead?
Hmm.
I'm going to just go ahead and tell your audience it's a sticker. I mean, honestly, you go to
Exactly.
you buy it in a pack of 12 and you stick it on your head
You stick it
and it
on.
comes right off. Mystery solved.
Mystery solved.
And then the other is, do cows really roam the streets of India? The
Do
answer
they?
is yes,
Yes. Yes, they do.
they do. They are sacred. We do not eat beef. We do not eat cows because the cow is seen as a, a person or an entity that provides everything.
Yeah.
Milk provides safety, provides shelter, everything.
Absolutely.
So demystifying two top questions that Indians get asked.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been absolutely wonderful. Is there anything else that you want the audience to know before we wrap up?
I would like your audience to remember that we're all human and we all have feelings, and we're all in the same struggle, trying to make our lives better for our family and friends. And if there's an immigrant person that you know, their struggle is twice as hard because they're having to assimilate to a whole new culture that they have not grown up in. And so I would ask you to be open minded and kind and compassionate and empathetic.
Always good advice.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. Is there any, do you want to give them how to find you and your podcast?
Yes. So my podcast is called edu-me, M-E, and it's www.edu-me.net. And you can find me on Facebook. I do edunars where every Thursday night we have a topic and we discuss it on parenting. Last night we talked about parent self-care.
Very important and timely topic.
Very, very important. And we all need a little sanity right now. So trying to keep us motivated by taking care of ourselves. And also blogs are on my website as well. So I'd love for you to listen in and join in the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adrienne.